Welcome to CosmoFactory, a podcast by Cosmoprof Worldwide Bologna, where we explore the entire cosmetics, personal care, and fragrance industry supply chain. I'm your host, Deanna Utrusky, and here at CosmoFactory, we look beyond the trends to discover the ideas, initiatives, and innovations that are truly advancing beauty. Let's get started. This episode is about the Internet of Things. It's about serialization technology, about traceability for both the raw materials and ingredient supply chain and for finished goods. It's about transparency, efficiency, safety, brand loyalty, and more. On today's episode of CosmoFactory, I am speaking with María Fernánda Hernandez Franco, Sustainability Director at Temera. María Fernanda, welcome to CosmoFactory.
Thank you so much, Deanna, for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thank you for your audience as well.
Of course, yeah. I'm sure we're all excited to listen to your insights today. To get started, I want to talk about the fundamentals of radio frequency identification tech as well as blockchain. Will you help us understand the basics of RFID and blockchain?
Of course. So radio frequency identification, it's the short of RFID that you will hear it often. And it's a long proven technology that allows us to track physical items using tiny chips that emit a radio signal. So most people now use it a form of RFID in a form of RFID that is called NFC, near field communication. So you will see it when you tap your phone or your card while you're paying something. So what's powerful about RFID is that it's already used to track physical items.
Yeah, perfect. You know, I always like to think that the more we know about a technology, the more effectively and creatively we can make use for it. So I think it's really helpful that you share that with our listeners who might be learning along with me. We need a little bit of a foundation.
Okay. So if you want, I can share a little bit more.
Sure.
Okay, so these chips are really interesting because they don't require a battery, don't track while dormant, and are activated when a reader comes near. Each one carries a unique ID and is encrypted. So what's really powerful about RFID is that it doesn't require a line of sight. So you can read hundreds of tags just in seconds, even through packaging or containers. It's already widely used in fashion for garments, but could be really interesting for products like cosmetics and fragrances, where, as you know, batch control, origin verification, and inventory precision are critical.
And your personal expertise is what we think of as ethical business. Of course, as your job title suggests, sustainability is very much your focus in the business. I know the company you work with does specialize in this serialization technology and traceability that we're starting to understand, and specifically for luxury goods. So before we get into cosmetics, personal care, and fragrance, I'm hoping you can share an example of how this technology is used for sustainability purposes in particular in another sector. Maybe it's luxury fashion, as you've mentioned a few times. Maybe it's jewelry or gemstones. But help us think about the sustainability uses of this in industry.
Of course, if I will add, because I think that something that was missing in the last question that would be interesting is just like really briefly to speak about blockchain.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think the blockchain to the RFID creates a really special thing. So the blockchain, I am not by no means expert, blockchain expert, but I will give like a high level so we could understand the importance for this technology for our industry. So blockchain is a form of decentralized technology that gives a sort of security and transparency levels by design. So when used for supply chain traceability or product ownership, it's a living digital record of every transaction of the product's life. So whether it's raw material sourcing, manufacturing, shipping, or product ownership and resale. So what is interesting is the data on a blockchain is immutable. It cannot be altered, and it's visible across distributed network. So what is important? The mix between the RFID and the blockchain, because it offers an incredible robust foundation for traceability, transparency, and product authentication. And this is where we at Temera and our blockchain partners like Aura Blockchain Consortium combine to deliver immutable product lifecycle information.
If I may, and maybe this is just for my imagination, but I did see sort of an analogy once helping explain blockchain because I think it can be a lot to get our head around. I think some people explain it as if you print the same book, right, thousands of times and distribute it around the world in bookstores, in libraries. Of course, people have it in their homes. And then in the event that someone sort of wants to hack this book, right, they would, need to go into my house and tear that one page out of the book and change it. And we might be able to see that that page was changed. But then we could look around the world, right, at all these other copies of the exact same book and see that the data had been corrupted. And I think that's a little bit what's going on with blockchain, but in a
It's
much
a
more sophisticated way.
great example. Actually, it's a great example because it makes it really easy to understand something that might feel like it's really complicated, but it's properly that. He
Yeah.
said, well, to secure and to block information. So it's important is the backbone as well of the data that is blocked. Because
Yeah.
of course, if you don't have the right information, it doesn't work. You need to have the right information to be blocked, to be protected. So a good example on the fashion industry is what we work with our client Acne Studios in the fashion industry. So they came to us with a really clear goal that was to bring transparency to their product lifecycle. So we helped them to launch the digital product passport across the complete range of garment and accessories, starting from the Fashion Winter 25 collection. Each piece now features a QR code that that shows immediately verified information from raw materials, supply chain traceability, sustainability certifications, and even care info. And it's all about making the invisible visible. And this was a really great example because at our point of view is a great engagement of our brand to provide a digital product password from each piece, not just a pilot, not just a capsule collection, but properly for every single item.
No, that's impressive. Let's think about the beauty industry, of course, because here on CosmoFactory, that's what we do. Um, what are some of the most valuable and impactful ways you think this technology can help with sustainability in our industry?
Well, great question. Beauty brands, as you know, are under growing pressure to prove sustainability of their products, whether ingredients come from, how packaging is sourced, whether ethical labor was used. Yet the reality is that many of these supply chains are deeply fragmented. So what RFID and this technology allows is a level of granular traceability that connects every touch point, creating a unified, transparent story for each product. So for example, we work with brands that embedded the NFC into the packaging. Okay, so these chips go directly into the beauty packaging, and that is one example. For example, with Culti Milano. Culti Milano is a brand that did this with us. And the idea and their digital ambition was to improve customer engagement. And the objective was to devise a system to uniquely identify more than 1.5 million products annually, which face several key challenges. And in this technology help, for example, in logistic optimization, improve tracking of outbound logistics, linking products to end customers for seamless upstream and downstream traceability. And also something that is really important that is happening in the beauty industry is the gray market mitigation. Because as you know, they need to combat the significant challenges posed by this situation that is happening in the beauty industry. So this technology also unlocks the potential of the digital product passport. And what it happens that in this case, consumers can scan the item with their iPhone and then immediately access to information, from raw material, the product's origin, material composition, certifications, and even recycling instructions. And it doesn't stop here. The digital twin also supports internal sustainability goals by capturing data on things like excess of inventory. Our report says that 6.2 of goods in the beauty and personal care sector in the global supply chain are discarded due to overproduction. So we can tackle that head on. Meanwhile, for example, Vogue Business estimates that between 20 and 40% of beauty products end up as waste. So we can support waste management as well.
Mm-hmm.
And on the consumer end too, we could encourage sustainability at every point of the supply chain. So we're optimizing logistics to reduce emissions and enabling smarter end-of-life strategies like reuse or refill. It's about making sustainability not just a brand value, but a measurable operational reality, and making that visible and meaningful to consumers too.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fantastic. Thinking about inventory and logistics, of course, the gray market, as you've suggested, is always a concern in our industry. But then what we think of as maybe post-consumer applications with packaging return, recycling, perhaps. I'm wondering if we can kind of go a little bit in the other direction and think about some of the sustainability goals earlier in manufacturing or earlier in ingredient sourcing. Is this technology being used in that space, or do you see the brands you're working with maybe encouraging their manufacturers to start using this technology? Or I guess what I'm thinking is, some of our listeners that lead supply chain companies, ingredient manufacturers, or contract manufacturing companies very much, need the same level of traceability throughout their work, but maybe for very different purposes, right? Not necessarily this idea of consumer assurance or even, post-consumer sort of compliance with recyclability or refills. Can you say anything about sort of earlier in the supply chain?
I think that your question goes more into the upstream and the downstream traceability, because that is what is really important. That is not just about the tax, it's also about the infrastructure, and this is what Temera really excels, because it's not just about, giving the tax, it's about giving the complete architecture and the information of the data from the raw material till the end of life. So that is really important, because at the end, when you have the tag, you need to have as the blockchain. If you have all the information of the end-to-end traceability, it doesn't really create potential for sustainability. So you really need to know the part of the raw material. And I do believe that what your question or your audience might be interesting is that also this part of, tracing the upstream information and the raw material information, not just gives the trust because you provide the information to analyze the ethical source, but also internally, besides the think of the consumers, internally how you're managing your production, your manufacturing, if something you need to be changed, if there are excessive or of products that have not been used, or inventory that has been stopped there. So everything relies on that information that could come from the raw material as well.
Interesting. And so many of the examples you've shared with the fashion brand, with the beauty brand, putting this RFID technology into packaging, these examples are what we might describe as indivisible items, right? And certainly in the ingredient space, we're dealing with something that people refer to as non-discrete materials, right? So something that's not necessarily a single object that I can hold in my hand, but maybe it's a liquid, a powder, sometimes it's even gases. I'm wondering how these sorts of materials are reliably tagged and traced. And I can, of course, imagine, okay, if I have a large container of a liquid, I can tag that large container. But then is there a greater risk of tampering or manipulation with ingredients and raw materials than there is with these sort of indivisible consumer items?
Yes, of course. Well, in the ingredient supply chain, the focus is more on the batch level and container level traceability. What's really powerful is how this integrates to the downstream visibility. When the finished product is created, for example, let's say a perfume or a serum, it carries a traceable link back to the original batch. So whether you're looking at compliance, auditing, a consumer-facing transparency, the entire lineage is captured. This also makes it easier to respond to potential quality issues. Any irregularity can be traced directly back to the source and bath. It is technically possible to achieve this, although sometimes it could be some challenges, as you mentioned, the thing of, the tampering. And because with liquids, it could be easy, to, is an ingredient that could be easy to dilute, to substitute, or to tamper. And sometimes in these paths, it has to a lot of handoff of manufacturers before arriving to the production, let's say, to the production facility. So what is important here, and it's essential, is to have digital traceability, which helps to understand each step and have the complete story of the product.
Yeah, and certainly as this technology has emerged, it's not the first time by any means that our industry has been tracing the ingredients, right? There are already very strong protocols in place, to mitigate those concerns at each handoff, as you've described, and certainly very good tracking strategies as well, just with different technologies, I think. But this certainly sounds like it adds to that. Earlier this year, I wrote a little news item about how some of this tagging technology, like most technology, right, is always being made in smaller and smaller versions. RFID is increasingly thinner and much more flexible. I mention this because I'm curious, at this point, is there an item or a label, a container? Is there anything we cannot tag at this point?
Well, there are a lot, as you mentioned. It's incredible how the technology has been evolved. For example, there are ultra thin flexible tags that work on curved surfaces, on bottles, or even on the foil length, sachets, But in most cases, we try to tag the product itself rather than to the packaging, because generally the packaging is often disposable. Now, if there are some things that can be tracked there, yes, there are some edges that might be a little bit complicated, because unfortunately in the beauty industry, there are still a lot of single-use blister packs or ultra miniature items, to give, customers to try things and so on. So in this situation, the tagging may not be cost effective or technically feasible. But even that, what we suggest is a secondary packaging to track at the batch or a kit level, if this item works.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Something can be tagged, even if it's not the
And
tiniest.
of course, the bigger limitation as well tends to be what we discussed before, but also comes into this question as well, to the system integration. This is a bigger limitation, because getting the data infrastructure right to support item level tracking.
And can you say anything about the challenge of sort of then integrating that with other systems that companies have, if maybe they haven't brought on this sort of RFID or blockchain in the past? How do you sort of plug that into how they have been working?
That is a really interoperability. We have all the systems that could really connect between some systems, because that could be, as I see it, also a sustainability passionate. And when I was really excited about this job and this role, is because I do believe that in order to make a shift to sustainability, you need to help the industry. It's not just like you need to work with my system. Then if a brand that doesn't work with your system anytime will not be sustainable. So you're not really helping them. So that is a monopoly. So no, in this part, we could really interact with clients that might be not using RFID and help them to interact, or they already have, but they didn't, have the right system. We could really help to be interoperative with all the end-to-end traceability.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm sure. It's not unusual. That's how we hear new technologies plugging in for sure all the time.
Yeah.
As we finish up, I am wondering what's next, particularly perhaps in terms of sustainability applications, since that's your specialty. What's coming next for this type of technology? Maybe something we haven't realized. Is there a next generation of this technology that we might be watching for? Are there new possibilities in terms of sustainability advantages for companies, for brands, consumers? Where are we at?
Well, I believe that there are like many possibilities, in this perspective. Is a huge potential for the next generation. I do believe that also there are things to explore. that are really interesting. For example, we're exploring now in the fashion industry, but I do believe that would be really interesting in the beauty industry as well, that is using the RFID and the digital IDs, not just to track products, but to diagnose material potential at end of life. So by combining the digital IDs with artificial intelligence, we can automatically identify products in waste streams and assess their recyclability. So I do believe that that is really important. And at my point of view, something that even if we have heard it a lot, I do believe that something that could really make a change will be the digital product passport. Because the digital product passport, not just in the fashion industry, but in the cosmetic industry and so on, will really find, a huge way to interact as consumer, as brand, accountability, and a new way of do business, and also as a consumer perspective too, to understand that the information that the brand that you are buying could interact with you, and you could be loyal to that brand for several reasons.
I love that. And that, I think I promised this was my last question, but it's not. I was listening to your answer, and it made me think we should sort of answer the question. If a product is tagged, right? Let's say we have a jar of face cream and we put this RFID technology into the container, right? And clearly, as you've said, the consumer, right, can then access information there, whether it's about sort of consumer assurance and they want to understand where the ingredients come from. Maybe they can access brand information. Maybe they can access, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but maybe even product tutorials, some sort of more sort of user experience information. But I'm wondering, is that one RFID tag the same tag that can be used by the manufacturer, by the the logistics company, by the retailer? And then, that information can be discrete depending on who's accessing it. Is that?
Totally. Okay. There are incredible technologies. I will answer these and I will do a step back. So something interesting just to add this. It's the same tag. You can have all this information to interact internally for sustainability situations, for logistic operations, but at the same time for customer. The same thing that you're saying, I have my high-end face cream and it's finished. And I just, tap with my phone the jar. And instead of tossing it, it could be a reward by bringing them back, and how to recycling it, or even a refill, or some, activation, because it's going to be an event of the brand. So connect a lot of positive business and loyalty as well. And something that came to my mind when you asked this is just like a flashback on a question that we discussed before, is how this technology is really important for several things. Because, for example, something that is really interesting that is used on the alcoholics verbiage and could be really interesting into the beauty industry is, for example, the tags that are in the ceiling. So when you open the ceiling, you understand that something was being, of course, could be tampered or could be modified before arriving to the end of the consumer. So this could be also something information, and this technology change on a different information when you break it or not. Whether you break it or no, but the same. So it's really interesting, the possibilities that you could rely on a tag.
Yeah, and we're so familiar with that sort of tamper evidence seal being something plastic or a peel back part of the packaging, but to have it a technological piece of it, that's a very interesting idea. Thank you for sharing that. Well, María Fernanda, I thank you for your time and for passing along so much useful information today. I really appreciate your being a guest on CosmoFactory.
Thank you so much, Diana. It was a really great conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. If you find the CosmoFactory podcast useful, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and share your thoughts so even more cosmetic industry professionals can discover the CosmoFactory. I'm Deanna Utrusky. Please join me again next Tuesday for a new episode of the CosmoFactory podcast.